to truly understand this week's scriptures, you have to know our Jewish heritage. I came back from vacation, and I was on a cruise, and next to us on the cruise, Father Larry and I were on a cruise, and next to us was a Jewish couple, a Jewish doctor. And the wife that was sitting there started talking to us, engaging with us. We're there all week next to each other. And she talked about worshiping God, she mentioned that we worship a different God than she does. And I said, that's not true. I said, I worship the God of Abraham and the God of Jacob and Isaac, the same God that you worship, we worship. We understand God differently because we believe the long-awaited Messiah that they're hoping for, he was the Messiah who came in Jesus, the Son of God. That was our difference. But we still have Jewish roots, and everything that we talk about, we have to understand the Jewish background and the Jewish faith. Let's begin doing that by the book of Wisdom. It's the last book in what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures. And this particular book, written, one of the last written ones, was addressed to the Jews who were in the diaspora, who were not necessarily living in the Jewish homeland, but they were in places outside, perhaps in Egypt or somewhere else. And this book is being addressed to those Jews who are out there in the diaspora. And what are they being reminded of? The Jewish people are being reminded of their heritage. The night of the Passover was known beforehand to our fathers. So they might have started to lose hope and faith, being outside, surrounded by their own people, but now they're in with pagan cultures and all different kinds of people, and they might be willing to give up the faith, perhaps, or to be worried about their heritage, because it was not being reinforced all the time in the people around them, immediately surrounding them. So they're being reminded by the author of the Book of Wisdom to think about the Passover and what it did. People, it says, your people awaited the salvation of the just and the destruction of their foes. They're talking about the Egyptians who were oppressing them. But Passover was a reminder of God's salvation, saving them, pulling them out of Egypt, and saving them, through the Red Sea. We hear that we know the story, I hope. So we have to know the background and the culture. For in secret, the holy children of the good were offering sacrifice. What was that sacrifice? It was the sacrifice of the lamb in Passover. In secret, they were doing that. And they had to put the blood on the doorposts and putting into effect with one accord the divine institution. So they're being reminded of the Jewish history that they had, the importance of Passover, that they would begin to understand that and understand their heritage. So that's the first book that we're asked to reflect on. And then the psalm follows up. Blessed are the people the Lord has chosen to be his own. Who are the chosen people according to the Scriptures? God chose the Hebrews, the Jewish people, to be his own. You will be my people, I will be your God. And so we need to understand that. Now, we get a little more deep here by going to the letter to the Hebrews. Who's the author? The author is probably a disciple of Paul. Some contend it's Paul himself, but there are many others who say no, it's one of Paul's disciples. So it's not listed as the letter of St. Paul to the Hebrews. It's listed simply as the letter to the Hebrews because it may be a disciple of Paul doing the actual writing. And what is he writing about? The importance of faith. How our faith is so essential. Faith is the realization of what is hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. We can't see things always, but we have to have a certain faith, a trust in God, that God will fulfill His promises. And the person He points out as the essential one, a person of faith, is Abraham. Now, if you listen closely, when the priest says the first Eucharistic prayer, we talk about our father in faith. Abraham is our father in faith. He's the patriarch of the Jewish people. From him, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob came, the tribes of Israel. So, but Abraham had to have a certain faith, didn't he? We know God asked him, first of all, to sacrifice your son, Isaac. And he's prefiguring, he's a type of Christ. Isaac is a type of Christ for us. That God was willing to give His son just as Abraham was willing to give Isaac, because God asked of him to do that. And so he was a person of faith. He trusted in God, even though it seemed to be a bizarre type request. Why would you kill my only heir, or want me to kill them and offer him as the sacrifice? If you promised that I would have an inheritance, that I have ancestors, my ancestors would be great as the sand on the shore, stars in the sky. How can that be if I sacrifice my only son? We know the story, I hope, how it played out, that God did not, in the end, have that done. But that's quite a request. And it's a type of what God would show fulfilled in Jesus. He was the one who fulfilled that ancient type of a sacrificial son. And so we hear about, how Abraham had this faith. And he was, even though he didn't get all the promises, he didn't see it fulfilled in his time, he was anticipating something greater. And that's what people of faith are able to see. Maybe God is not going to fulfill everything that's promised in my lifetime, but we know God is going to do what He promised. I keep saying it time and time again, God is in charge. And He's doing something in our world, whether we see it or not. He's doing something in our lives, whether we see it or not. So if you're a person of faith, then you're trusting that God is at work. As Abraham, our father in faith, trusted. He was told to go, and you'll have a promised land, and you'll have ancestors and everything else. He's being asked at an old age, 75 or something like that, when all this started. And yet he trusted to do what God asked him to do, although he would not see all of the results himself. That's the point. Are we going to see all the results of what God has promised? Maybe not in our lifetime, but we are in the process of seeing God and His plan unfold. And we all have to trust and have faith. So as we see, we hear by faith, when Abraham was put to the test, offered up Isaac, he was willing to trust. Even if he died, he said God could bring him back somehow or do something. He had that trust in God. And he trusted that God would lead him to the promised land, even though he didn't see the total fulfillment of everything at that point in his life. Now we get into the gospel for a moment. And the gospel is Jesus talking to His disciples and instructing them. And they have to have faith as well. And He's giving certain marching orders and certain demands that He has. So it has to be a faith, once again, a detachment to the things of this world, so that you keep your eyes focused on the things of heaven. That's what Jesus is trying to get them. Sell your belongings and give alms. Why would He have His disciples sell their belongings if He's not saying, you've got to trust me in this? You're going to have to trust divine providence. You're going to have to trust that I'm going to take care of you. And that the things of this world are not the essential things. The things of heaven are the things that we have to focus on. Provide money bags for yourselves that do not wear out, and an inexhaustible treasure in heaven. So the focus He's trying to do or make for the disciples is not here, downward, but upward to heaven. That's your true homeland. And we all need to understand that and be ready, be prepared, because the master of the house will return. Speaking in parable about himself, he's coming back someday. We can all get impatient and say, well, it's been 2,000 years, he hasn't shown up. But it doesn't mean he won't come tomorrow or the next day. So are we ready and prepared in that sense? But also, I always flip the coin and say, well, the other way we're going to meet Christ is when we leave this earth at some point. Whether it be after a long life or a very short life, no one escapes death. And it's a sad reality. It's a harsh reality. But in whatever time frame God gives us, that we are going to die. And, that is part of this whole being prepared for the day when we meet God through death. Or when we have to realize God's presence when he seems to be absent. Why is he not answering my prayer? Where is he? And I'm called to journey through that in faith at the same time. That I need to keep my eyes focused on Christ and about being prepared. The prudent, faithful servant is the one who is ready when his master returns. He refers to himself as the Son of Man. And that goes back again. We have to know our Old Testament to Daniel, the book of Daniel, in which the Son of Man comes on the clouds from heaven. And Jesus, associated himself with this image of the Son of Man in the Old Testament. You'll hear him refer to himself as the Son of Man, or those kind of terms, in reference to something in the Old Testament. And so he's telling us to make preparations, to get ready, be detached from the things of this world as to focus on the things of heaven. And a reminder to us all, and I have to stand up here in fear and trembling in many ways, because the more that is given, the more will be required. I always say, pray for your priest, pray for your bishop, pray for the pope, because the more that's given, and the more responsibility that we have, the more is going to be required of us from God. And we are so imperfect. Every one of us is imperfect. We don't do everything we're supposed to do. We're faulty. We're human. So you pray for your priest, pray for your bishop, pray for your pope and those who are in charge, because Jesus is entrusting this to, first of all, the apostles, but also reminding us on a broader level that everyone who's given responsibility will be held accountable, whether it's a father or mother in a household, or a teacher, or somebody who has positions of authority, like government officials. We all have a certain accountability in our lives before God, and we need to be ready for that. So it's part of the call of the gospel, to have faith like the ancients, to trust, to know your heritage, to know your tradition, and to realize that Jesus Christ will fulfill his promises. He will fulfill the things that need to be done on our behalf. Maybe we won't see it, but that's part of faith, that we trust that God's plan will happen according to his will. May God bless you.